When we were working on the agenda for the conference, and obviously it's a tedious process, one of our team members said, we have to invite the CEO of Strava. And I go, why? He says, if you're not on Strava, it didn't happen. He's a 5 times Ironman. So if he's not on Strava, it didn't happen. So I said, well, that's it. We must have the CEO of Strava, Mark Gainey. And our moderator is Aaref Hilaly, partner of Sequoia Capital. I don't think I even need to introduce Sequoia Capital. Everybody knows what it is. And a few stats about Strava, just quickly. So Strava passed 1 billion shared activities, has over 600 professional, because I think every amateur athlete is on Strava. So more than 600 professional athletes is on the network. A global community has athletes from 180 countries. 1 million athletes join Strava every 30 days. Well, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. My name's Aaref. I'm at Sequoia, and over the years, we've had the privilege of partnering with many exceptional companies. One of our recent partnerships is with Strava, so it's a great pleasure to be here with Mark today. Maybe, Mark, we just heard a couple of the aggregate statistics, but maybe you could as a level set to start us off, could you give us a sense for maybe just what was the origin of Strava, the idea, and then again, just very briefly paint the picture of where the business is today in your mind?
Sure. So Strava was founded in 2009 by myself and my co-founder, Michael Horvath, 2 guys who've been best friends for 25 years. We met on the crew team in college. It's relevant not only because it's a great friendship, we've founded multiple companies together, but that crew team experience was really important. When we were working out, when we were in that boathouse, life was great. And the problem was we graduated, and poof, that disappeared. And so for 30 years, we've literally had a business plan that dates back to the early 90s that said, how would we go and recreate that locker room? How would we recreate that experience we had, the esprit de corps, the camaraderie, the competition that comes from participating in sports, but hopefully use the internet to do it. So fast forward to 2009, the 2 of us set out on a mission to see if we could make the world a little more active and really keep it simple. Frankly, let's motivate and entertain the world's athletes. As you heard, if you fast forward to today, we're on a pretty good run. We're supporting tens of millions of athletes worldwide. We're in actually about 190 countries now. There's not a place in the globe where somebody isn't uploading an activity to Strava. We're supporting everybody that runs and rides and surfs and skis. We just surpassed 1 billion activities on Strava last week. We add 1 million athletes every 30 to 40 days, as you heard. So we've just got this wonderful community that's developed online. And they're really there. They compete with each other. They train with each other. They give virtual high fives, which we call kudos, to each other. And then they use these uploads. They bring these activities in so they can understand their own training patterns and just their own health and so forth. So it's sort of multifaceted.
Fantastic. So let's dig in a little bit and just explore a little bit about the journey between those 2 points, the time from when you had the idea to today. And in particular, I want to separate 2 phases, because I think this happens for businesses where there's a startup phase and then a scale-up phase. And the challenges and the approaches are quite different. If we start with startup, because there'll be a number of entrepreneurs in the audience just starting out on their journey, how did you were a second-time entrepreneur. You'd previously started an enterprise software company that had gone public. So I'm sure when you started Strava, even though it was a different domain, you brought to it a specific approach and the benefit of that experience. So how did you think of navigating that startup phase when you were just starting out? What was important?
Yeah, so there's a misconception in Strava that if you're familiar with us, everybody thinks we were started by these hardcore cyclists. Because if you go back to our earliest days, that's where we were focused, very much on a passionate cycling community. Here's the irony. Michael and I are actually not good cyclists at all. But what we had done was to take a strategy that, frankly, we had deployed early in our first company at Kana. It was a customer email company that morphed into a massive CRM company. And what we did was we picked one specific vertical, and we said, let's go deep. In the enterprise software company, it was literally responding to customer email inside companies, which many people considered a feature at the time, but it turned into a much bigger business. And for Strava, it was, let's go pick the cyclists. They weren't being well served online. They were tech savvy. They were investing in a lot of equipment and things that were collecting data. And frankly, the demographics were great. You know, these were highly educated, lots of disposable income, just a great sort of nucleus of customer to start with. So the good news in that time was that we got early product market fit. We were able to go out and talk to that audience. We knew where to find them. A lot of great insight early in terms of what they needed from a digital solution. We got a fanatical following, that old adage of go find customers who love you versus like you. We got this group that was pretty obsessed with the Strava experience. If there was a downside, if you just think about the cycling market itself, it tends to scale very much in the male category. In fact, a pretty competitive male. It's referred to as mammals. If you know this acronym, it's middle-aged men in Lycra. We supported a lot of middle-aged men in Lycra in the early days of Strava. But it was great. It was a passionate group that just built a fervor around Strava. And what we found was that even though that market looked small at the time, two things happened. One, we ended up developing leadership. So we might have been in a small category, but we were the leader. And so we had a voice in the marketplace. We could start talking to partners. The other thing was we got lucky. Frankly, we caught the renaissance of cycling. And so even today, now 8 years later, cycling grows at clips that, frankly, we never, ever anticipated.
I think that's a really important point, and this is something that we work with our companies on as well. Before I came to Sequoia, I was an entrepreneur, and when I started my first company at one of my early board meetings, I presented a plan that showed basically a very high-level message and how we were going to be this big data center automation company. And Mike Moritz, who was on my board at the time, basically threw up on it and said, no, don't give me the tip of the spear, give me the poison on the tip of the spear, because to get anywhere in the market, you have to be the best at something and make it very specific. So in Strava's case, it was cyclists, and that's where the company started and got initial traction. And then as you move from startup to the scale-up phase, I'm imagining you had to start thinking about moving beyond that. And at what stage did you start that process? Did you see cyclists topping out and then you started thinking about it? Or when did you begin thinking of your what I'll call Act 2? Right.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we sort of saw this renaissance of cycling. So we were actually experiencing pretty explosive growth through 2009, 10, 11. About 2012, we went back and, again, our original mission from day one was to think about how we could support the world's athletes. So we always talked about sort of this global community, regardless of sport, that we could somehow bring together. So in 2012, with cycling on a pretty good clip, in fact, frankly, I would argue we were a little overconfident. We sort of knew what we thought was right. We decided to launch for the running community. And we were so arrogant, in fact, that we thought, okay, you know what? We'll just take our cycling solution. We'll sort of reskin it. We'll launch a second app for runners, and it'll work. It'll be great.
How did that go?
Yeah, no, it was horrible. It was horrible. So we launched running in 2012. Candidly, it took us another 2 to 3 years to get it right. We took a big step back. We just saw that the adoption rates were not what we wanted. And we realized we had to look inside our four walls. So a couple of things we learned. Number one, we had to change the DNA inside the company. We've been really fortunate. If you look at sort of how we grew our team, the employees at Strava, we were able to recruit from the community. If you were a cyclist and you were a software engineer, you wanted to work at Strava. So that was great because it was really easy to recruit. The only downside was they were so focused on the cycling experience, we had nobody who understood the mind of a runner.
Did you face resistance from moving beyond cycling into running? Did people on the team say, hey, wait a minute, I signed up for cycling, now suddenly we're doing this other thing, we're selling out, who are these other people, what are we doing?
No question. We faced resistance internally, and we definitely faced resistance from our existing community. Yeah. Sort of how do you appease the core, yet recognize, guys, there's a bigger opportunity here, and frankly, they can all play together. And so we did. As we started to basically infuse running DNA into the company. We started hiring runners, literally, people in that format. We took some time to go back and research. We actually came to appreciate that the behaviors of people who love to ride versus run is actually different. They're subtle little things. Runners are creatures of habit. It's a very efficient, I'm more a runner actually than I am a cyclist, and it's just an efficient way of getting a workout in. I can leave my house, I can go out for 30 minutes, I do the same loop over and over. Whereas when I go ride my bike, I go explore, I go find different places. So we had to rethink the experience at a pretty fundamental level.
Right, right. So as you looked at making this, at expanding the kind of footprint of the company, how did you reconcile the kind of the people who want to stick with cycling and then the group that didn't? Did you have to put your foot down as founder and use moral authority to say, no, even though the cycling business is going really well and we're growing, it's not enough, we still need to look beyond that? And then how did you tie them together? Because you don't want to be two disparate businesses of, oh, well, we have this kind of runner app over there and then a cycling app over there. There needs to be a kind of common identity between them.
Yeah. I think that, I like the word you used. There was a little bit of moral authority that was going on. As co-founders in the company, we could try to just socialize, and it was just a lot of conversations around, it's not a matter of leaving one business to go do another, it's how do we partner these together. We use data, frankly, Aaref, to prove out our thesis. One of the things we learned very quickly about our own existing community, they actually weren't necessarily cyclists as much as they love to ride. But they also do other things. They also love to run, and they ski, and they do all kinds of other activities, and we weren't doing a good job of supporting our existing community. So once we sort of looked at the data and could see that they were doing other things, it got our own team comfortable that supporting our existing athletes meant expanding out. And then, I'm sorry, you had the other second part of
so that was just the first part of the question was just, yeah, using your moral authority to extend, and then the second part was, as you think of running and cycling, how do you tie it together so there's a unifying theme? Because as a company, you want to stand for one thing, ideally as a company. It's very hard to have separate, disparate things in people's minds.
Yeah. So a couple things happen at a very tactical level. Examples, I mentioned that we launched these two apps. So in 2014, no more. We need to merge. It was both for growth reasons, we needed to merge those apps. We were literally cannibalizing ourselves in the App Store and so forth, but also just culturally. We were trying to communicate to any member on Strava, we're all part of one community, but we were going to have sort of our own shared likenesses and the groups that we want to be a part of. So that was an important step for us. And then when you also thought about the way in which we began to look at our members, we were able to get into much deeper insight into why someone was participating in sports. Rather than thinking about the what, how many miles they rode or where they were, we began to understand the motivation behind why they were doing it. Is it because they love competition? Or is it about self-improvement? Or are they goal-oriented? Or are they what we call lifestyle athletes, where frankly they just simply have to wake up and go do something? It turned out that once we figured out those behaviors or motivations were universal across the sports. And so we could begin building for those personas instead of the sport itself, which has served us well.
So essentially you're looking to up-level Strava from being for cyclists or for runners to being more of a lifestyle brand around health and fitness, keying in on people's motivations for doing those activities.
So we're very careful. We feel like at Strava we have to split our brain into two. We take a lot of great cues from a lot of the great technology companies here in the Valley and start to understand the way in which we want to grow the business and support them with technology. But we use the other half of our brain watching what many of the best consumer brands, particularly in the sports world, have done. And you'll never see us leave sort of that notion of being aspirational and building as though we are a great global sports brand. So for instance, we're very clear, we always want to make sure that Strava meets the needs of the most demanding athletes in the world. If you want to have fun right now, we've got 2 athletes that are out climbing Everest on Strava. They're literally uploading their daily walks or their hikes to summit Everest without oxygen. We had guys winning stages in last week's Giro d'Italia, the famed sort of pro cycling race. We have Olympic gold medalists. We have NASCAR world champions that are uploading. They're literally uploading now their NASCAR races on Strava. So we'll stay dedicated to that group, but make no mistake, the reason we do it is because they're incredibly inspirational and they bring the vast majority of Strava members along for the ride.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think we've got time for one more question. The thing I think it might be helpful to share, I feel one thing that has really stood out about working with Mark over the past few years from Sequoia's perspective has been how thoughtful he is about the next step of the journey. And I think you've got a sense for that in terms of how he thought about going from startup to scale up. Recently, Mark decided to step back from leading the company entirely his decision. And maybe you could just talk a bit about, to the founders out there, about how you thought about that and what made you want to change your own role.
Yeah. So what Aaref is alluding to, as of Tuesday, Strava will have a new CEO. It's a search that we've been doing for 15 months. I went to the board a year and a half ago, and after doing this 8 years, and I won't bore you with a long story of sort of the way in which Michael and I have led this company, we came to the board. The thesis was really twofold. One, frankly, at a very personal level, I'm a single dad, and I live down here on the peninsula, and the business is in San Francisco, and it's very hard to be in two places simultaneously. So there was just a level of sustainability that I needed to figure out. More importantly, we're really excited when you look at sort of the trajectory of Strava and where we are today. We're about 140, 150 people today, and we're quickly trying to hire up into, over the course of the next few years, we'll be hundreds. From a business model standpoint, we're tens of millions today, and we can see sort of where we're about to start to hit into hundreds of millions. And when you begin to look at that, it's a different phase for the company. And so the opportunity for us to go find leadership that could help Michael and I just enjoy that part of the process, we got really excited about.
Fantastic. Well, Mark, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and insights. It's been a wonderful journey so far. Thank you.